Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Solaria's emerald skin glistened with sweat as she pressed her knee into the human's chest, pinning him against the scorching canyon floor. Her fiery red hair, braided with ritual bone beads that marked her kills, whipped in the hot wind like flames against her angular face. The ceremonial dagger in her grip, forged from the meteoric iron that fell when her ancestors first claimed this world, caught the light in through crimson reflections across the canyon walls. The human beneath her should have been screaming, should have been begging. Instead, he lay there with an infuriating calm, his weathered face split by a grin that revealed teeth too white for someone who'd spent years in the outer colonies. Blood trickled from a gash above his left eye, and his tactical vest was torn from their brutal chase through the razor-sharp terrain. But his gray eyes held no fear. "Any last words, human?" Solaria's voice was a predatory growl, the accent of her people lending harsh edges to the standard tongue. The blade hovered inches from his throat, steady despite her racing heart. This kill would restore her honor. This kill would prove she belonged among the finest hunters of her clan. The human's grin widened. "Yeah." His voice was rough from dehydration, tinged with an accent she couldn't place. "You're holding it wrong." The words hit her like a physical blow. Wrong? She was Solaria of the Crimson Hunt, trained from birth in the 17 killing forms, heir to a blade legacy that stretched back 14 generations. Her grip was perfect, thumb positioned for maximum control, fingers wrapped with the precise tension taught by the blade masters themselves. Rage flared in her chest, hot as the desert air. With a snarl that would have made a canyon stalker flee in terror, she struck downward with all her strength. But something impossible happened. The human moved, not dramatically, not with the wild desperation of prey, but with a subtle shift that seemed to redirect the very force of her attack. Her wrist twisted, her perfectly trained grip faltered, and the ancient blade that had tasted the blood of hundreds slipped from her fingers like water. The dagger embedded itself in the sand with a soft whisper, its ornate hilt standing upright like a gravestone. Solaria stared at her empty hand in shock. He sat up slowly, brushing sand from his torn shirt. "Told you," he said, that insufferable smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. In 23 cycles of life, she had never lost her grip on a blade. It was impossible. It was humiliating. How? The word escaped her lips like a prayer to gods she'd stopped believing in. The human, Alex she remembered from the bounty posting, slowly reached for his water canteen. "Mind if I drink?" Desert's got a way of making philosophy thirsty work. She should have lunged for her blade, should have strangled him with her bare hands, should have activated the plasma charges in her belt and ended this mockery once and for all. Instead, she found herself nodding. Alex took a long drink, his throat working as he swallowed. When he lowered the canteen, his expression had shifted from amusement to something like curiosity. "You really want to know? Tell me." The words came out as a command, but Solaria could hear the desperate edge in her own voice. "Your grip's technically perfect," Alex said, settling back against a boulder with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. "Textbook, even. I'm guessing you've been training since you could walk?" "Since I could hold steel," she admitted, hating herself for answering. "Thought so. You've got all the forms down, all the muscle memory, but you're gripping like someone who's never been afraid to lose their weapon." His gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Problem is, the moment you're certain you can't lose something, you've already lost it." The philosophy made no sense to her, but the demonstration had been undeniable. Solaria reached for her dagger, pulling it from the sand and checking the blade for damage. The meteoric iron was unharmed, its edge still keen enough to split a hair. She settled into her stance, the seventh form, designed for close quarters killing, and raised the weapon. "Show me again," she demanded. Alex shook his head. "Nah, once was enough to make my point." "I said show me." The words came out as a roar that echoed off the canyon walls, but Alex didn't even flinch. "And I said no." He stood, dusting off his pants with maddening calm. "You're not ready to learn. You're just angry that someone broke your favorite toy." Before Solaria could respond, he was already walking away, heading deeper into the canyon with the steady gait of someone who knew exactly where he was going. She watched him go, her grip tightening on the dagger's hilt until her knuckles went white. She followed his tracks in the sand. He didn't look back. The Crimson Hunt's amphitheater rose from living rock, skull-adorned walls echoing with blade song as young hunters practiced their deadly forms. Solaria entered through the main gate, her head held high despite the failure that burned in her chest like acid. Warriors stopped their training to watch her pass, their expressions shifting from expectation to confusion as they took in her empty hands and dusty appearance. She carried no trophy, no proof of the kill. By the time she reached the central chamber, word had already spread. The matron waited for her on the seat of judgment, a throne carved from a single piece of black stone that had been worn smooth by centuries of use. Around her, the clan's elite hunters formed a semicircle, their own trophies gleaming from their belts and bandoliers. The matron was ancient by their people's standards, her green skin marked with the ritual scars that told the story of every significant kill she'd made. Her eyes, once as fierce as a hunting cat's, had gone pale with age, but they still burned with an intensity that could make even the bravest warrior's blood run cold. Solaria of the Crimson Hunt, the matron's voice echoed through the chamber like the crack of a whip. You were tasked with claiming the head of the human mercenary who dared to trespass on our sacred hunting grounds. Where is your trophy? The silence in the chamber was absolute. Solaria could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, could sense the anticipation and the barely concealed scorn of her rivals. Among them stood Kethara, her childhood nemesis, whose smile was sharp as any blade. I encountered the target, Solaria said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. But I did not claim him. A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the assembled hunters. The matron raised one clawed hand, and silence fell like a hammer blow. You did not claim him, the matron repeated, her tone dangerously soft. Explain. How could she explain what had happened in the canyon? How could she put into words the moment when her certainty had crumbled, when everything she'd been taught about strength and skill had proven insufficient? He escaped, she said finally, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Kethara's laughter rang out like the cry of a carrion bird. Escaped? From Solaria the Swift? Solaria the Sure-Handed? Her voice dripped with mock surprise. How extraordinary! Silence! The matron's command echoed through the chamber, but her pale eyes remained fixed on Solaria. You shame yourself and your lineage with this failure. The matron's voice cracked like a whip. For 14 generations, your bloodline has brought honor to the Crimson Hunt. You were given one task. Instead, you return empty-handed. The ceremonial staff struck stone 3 times. Solaria of the Crimson Hunt, you are hereby cast out. Return only when you have claimed your quarry's head or found one worthy of your own. Solaria fled into the desert, her exile burning behind her like a funeral pyre. 3 days later, she found him in the ruins of an ancient way station, its crumbling walls testament to some long-forgotten civilization. Alex sat in the shade of a broken arch, methodically cleaning a plasma rifle that looked like it had seen action on a dozen worlds. He didn't look up as she approached, didn't acknowledge her presence until she was close enough to strike. Took you longer than I expected, he said conversationally, still focused on his weapon. Figured you'd be back within the day. Solaria's hand rested on the hilt of her dagger, but she made no move to draw it. The memory of her humiliation in the canyon was still fresh, a wound that throbbed with every heartbeat. Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance? Same reason you're not trying to kill me right now. You want to understand more than you want revenge. Teach me what you did, how you made me lose my grip. Alex laughed. You're not ready for that lesson. You're desperate. When you can admit everything you know might be wrong, come find me. He started to walk away, but Solaria's voice stopped him. Where are you going? South. There's a trading post about 3 days from here. Figure I'll resupply, maybe catch a ride off this rock before your people decide to send someone more competent after me. The casual insult should have enraged her, but instead, Solaria found herself oddly impressed by his audacity. I'm coming with you. Alex turned back, his expression skeptical. Like hell you are. You said I need time and experience. I can get both by following you. And what makes you think I want company, especially company that's been hired to kill me? Solaria met his gaze steadily. Because you could have killed me 3 days ago, and you didn't. Because you could have killed me just now, and you didn't. Whatever your reasons, you don't want me dead. Alex studied her for a long moment, then shook his head with a rueful smile. You're either very brave or very stupid. I'm exiled, Solaria said simply. What difference does it make? Fine, but we do this my way. You follow my lead. No debates about honor or tradition. The words chafed against every instinct, but Solaria nodded. Alex shouldered his pack and started walking. Then let's go. And kid? Yes? Keep that blade sheathed unless I tell you otherwise. The way you hold it tells everyone exactly what kind of fighter you are. What kind is that? Alex's smile was sharp as any weapon. The kind that's never been afraid. They walked in silence, Alex moving with casual confidence while constantly scanning for threats. Solaria found herself studying him, scarred, experienced, dangerous, but with a quality of attention that seemed to take in everything. You're staring, Alex said without turning around. I'm observing. Try again. What do you see? Solaria focused. You favor your right side. Check your 6 every 30 seconds. You're careful but not paranoid. You expect trouble but don't fear it. Now you're starting to see. Fear and caution aren't the same thing. Is that why you didn't fear me? In the canyon? I did fear you, Alex said, surprising her. I feared what you represented. Blind certainty, absolute conviction. Those are the most dangerous things in the universe. Before Solaria could ask what he meant, Alex suddenly stopped and held up one hand. She froze, her own senses automatically extending outward. There, the almost inaudible hum of repulsor engines growing closer. Raiders, Alex whispered, already moving toward the cover of a nearby rocky outcropping. 3 vehicles, maybe 4, moving fast. Solaria's hand moved instinctively to her dagger, but Alex caught her wrist. Not yet. First rule of survival, don't fight unless you have to. Second rule, if you have to fight, make sure you win. They crouched behind the rocks as the raider vehicles crested a nearby ridge, their engines screaming like banshees. The machines were cobbled together from salvaged parts, part speeder, part tank, part nightmare. Weapons bristled from every available mounting point, and the crews that manned them looked like they'd been assembled from the same chaotic philosophy. Slavers, Alex identified, his voice grim, probably working the trade routes between here and the outer colonies. Bad news for us. Why? Because they've got sensors that can track heat signatures for miles. They've already seen us. As if to confirm his words, the lead vehicle suddenly changed course, heading directly for their position. The others followed, spreading out in a classic hunting formation that would cut off any attempt at escape. So we fight, Solaria said, drawing her blade. Not like that. Alex's hand covered hers, gently forcing the weapon back into its sheath. Watch and learn. The raiders thundered closer, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust that obscured the desert like a sandstorm. Solaria could see their faces now, scarred, brutal, eager for violence. She counted at least a dozen fighters spread across 4 vehicles, all of them armed with weapons that could turn a person into vapor. Alex stood up. Solaria stared at him in disbelief as he walked out from behind their cover, his hands raised in apparent surrender. The raiders saw him immediately, their vehicles slowing as they approached. The leader, a massive brute with more metal than flesh in his face, dismounted and stalked forward, a plasma caster held casually in one massive hand. Well, the raider leader's voice was like grinding metal. What do we have here? Looks like someone's lost. Very lost, Alex agreed amiably. Name's Morrison, independent salvager. Just trying to make my way to the trading post at Broken Spine. Morrison, huh? The raider's augmented eyes glowed with internal light as he ran some kind of scan. You're not showing up in any of our databases, Morrison. That's because I pay good money to stay out of databases. Alex's smile was self-deprecating. Man's got to make a living, you know? The raider laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, you're going to make us a living, all right. You and that pretty green piece hiding behind the rocks. Solaria tensed, but Alex's voice remained conversational. Now see, that's where we might have a problem. She's not really the sharing type. She'll learn. Maybe, but here's the thing. Alex's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his weight settling onto the balls of his feet. I'm not really the teaching type. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Alex moved like lightning, striking the raider leader's wrist and dropping him with a nerve pinch. Rolling behind the fallen leader's vehicle, his hands found the maintenance panel. Every salvage vehicle has one, he called out. They never secure them properly. The vehicle crashed in sparks and debris. Alex flowed between the remaining raiders, catching one's axe swing and using momentum to drive him into the ground, kicking sand into another's plasma rifle until it exploded. Environment, Alex called out. Use everything. Solaria began to understand. The desert wasn't just a battlefield. It was a weapon. Sand could blind or jam mechanisms. Rocks could be used as cover or projectiles. The sun's position could create shadows or cause opponents to fight while looking into glaring light. She began to move differently, using these elements as extensions of her own capabilities. When a raider cornered her against a boulder, she didn't meet his charge head-on. Instead, she rolled aside and let his momentum carry him into the stone. When another tried to pin her down with covering fire, she used the reflective surface of a crashed vehicle to blind him before closing for the kill. The fight was over in minutes. The surviving raiders fled on their remaining vehicles, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Solaria stood amid the wreckage, her blade clean despite the violence, breathing hard but exhilarated. Not bad, Alex said, checking one of the fallen enemies for useful supplies. You're starting to think instead of just react. Is that what you meant? In the canyon? Alex looked up from his scavenging, his expression thoughtful. Part of it. You're learning to see the whole picture instead of just focusing on your target. That's the first step. What's the second? Understanding why you're fighting in the first place. Alex stood, a salvaged water recycler in his hands. Come on, we've got ground to cover before they come back with friends. Rock gave way to endless sand, just heat, her, and him. Taught me to think different, he explained as they took shelter in the shade of a broken comm tower. When you're outnumbered 10-1, you can't fight like your enemy expects. You have to be water, find the cracks, flow around the obstacles, strike where they're not defending. But you were a soldier, Solaria said. You had training, discipline, structure. How is that different from what I learned? Tell me about your sister. Solaria turned away. I don't want to talk about it. I'll tell you about my team first. We were the best. 3 years together, 7 engagements, never lost anyone. Then I got them killed holding a position when we should have retreated. I was too proud to admit that sometimes retreat is the right answer. Solaria felt recognition twist in her chest. My sister Velara was supposed to inherit our mother's blade. In a clan war, she accepted single combat, but hesitated at the killing stroke. Wanted to prove her superiority first. The enemy feigned weakness, then struck when she chose mercy over victory. So you've been trying to prove you won't make her mistakes. And failing spectacularly. Alex stared up at the stars scattered across the desert sky. Solaria followed his gaze. You humans always stare at stars. No, Alex said quietly. Just at rare ones. Good. That's the first honest thing you've said. Alex stood. You're fighting the wrong battle. So focused on being worthy of your sister's blade that you've forgotten to ask whether the blade is worthy of who you could become. Before Solaria could respond, Alex was already standing, shouldering his pack. Come on. We've got another 2 hours of daylight, and I want to reach that trading post before the scavengers pick over the best salvage. They walked in comfortable silence, Solaria's mind churning with new possibilities. The desert around them began to change as they approached civilization. The occasional piece of debris became scattered settlements, and the settlements became a sprawling maze of prefabricated structures and jury-rigged shelters that surrounded the trading post like a metallic cancer. Broken spines sprawled around a crashed cargo hauler, its broken spine forming the main street where desperate souls sought passage between stars. Alex moved through the crowds with practiced ease, but Solaria found herself overwhelmed by the press of bodies and the cacophony of a dozen different languages. Humans rubbed shoulders with species she'd never seen before, their appearances ranging from merely exotic to utterly alien. Stay close, Alex murmured, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. Places like this eat the unprepared alive. They found lodging at a hostel that might charitably have been described as a step above camping in the open desert. 2 beds, a water recycler that worked intermittently, and walls thin enough that they could hear every conversation in the adjoining rooms. But it was shelter, and after days in the brutal heat, Solaria found herself grateful for even these modest comforts. Tomorrow we figure out transport, Alex said, settling onto his bed with a weary sigh. There's usually at least one freight captain willing to take passengers, assuming they're not too picky about where they end up. And then what? Solaria asked. Then we go our separate ways. I find work, you. Well, I guess you figure out what comes after exile. The casual dismissal stung more than Solaria had expected. Over the past few days, she'd grown accustomed to Alex's steady presence, his quiet competence, the way he challenged her assumptions without making her feel foolish. The thought of returning to solitude, to the endless cycle of hunt and kill that had defined her existence, suddenly seemed unbearable. What if I don't want to go our separate ways? Alex looked up from cleaning his rifle, his expression unreadable. What are you suggesting? You said I need time and experience, travel with you, teach me what you know about fighting, about thinking, about seeing the bigger picture. I'm not looking for a partner. I'm not asking to be your partner. I'm asking to be your student. Alex set aside his weapon, his gray eyes studying her face with that uncomfortable intensity she was beginning to recognize. And what do I get out of this arrangement? The question caught Solaria off guard. In her clan, knowledge was passed down through bloodlines and formal apprenticeships. The idea of negotiating for instruction was foreign to her. What do you want? Honest answer? I want to understand why an elite alien warrior is so desperate to learn from a washed-up human mercenary that she's willing to abandon everything she's ever known. The truth sat in Solaria's throat like a stone, too large and jagged to swallow, too heavy to spit out. But Alex waited with the patience of someone who learned the value of silence, and eventually the words came. Because everything I've ever known has failed me. My training, my traditions, my understanding of what it means to be strong, all of it crumbled the moment you showed me I was holding my blade wrong. And I need to know what comes next. I need to know who I am when I'm not defined by my ancestors' expectations. Alex nodded slowly, as if her answer had confirmed something he'd suspected. All right, I'll teach you. But we do this properly. No shortcuts, no rushing ahead because you think you understand something you don't. And no going back to your people until you're ready. How will I know when I'm ready? Alex's smile was enigmatic. You'll know. The weeks that followed blurred in sweat and gradual understanding. Alex broke down everything Solaria knew about combat, rebuilding it from scratch. He taught her to read opponents through subtle tells, to see combat as conversation where every move was question and answer. Everyone has a story, he explained during sparring. How they move, breathe, hold weapons, it tells you who they are and how they'll break. Solaria learned to see beyond the immediate threat, to understand combat as a conversation between opponents, where every move was both question and answer. She began to appreciate the elegant economy of Alex's fighting style. The way he never used more force than necessary, never committed to an attack that left him overextended. But the most difficult lessons weren't about fighting at all. They were about learning to question the assumptions that had shaped her entire worldview. Why do you fight? Alex asked one evening as they sat around a small fire, sharing a meal of processed rations and recycled water. To protect my people, to uphold honor, to prove my worth. Those are all external motivations. I'm asking about you, personally. Strip away the clan expectations, the family legacy, the need to prove anything to anyone. Why do you, Solaria, choose to take up weapons against other living beings? The question haunted her through sleepless nights and endless days of travel. She found herself examining her memories, looking for the moment when killing had become as natural as breathing. Had there ever been a choice? Or had she simply followed the path laid out for her by generations of ancestors, never stopping to consider whether it was the path she wanted to walk? The answer came to her during a fight with claim jumpers who tried to muscle in on a salvage site they'd been working. Solaria found herself facing 3 opponents at once, their plasma weapons filling the air with deadly energy. But instead of the cold calculation she'd been trained to embrace, she felt something else. A fierce protectiveness for Alex, who was pinned down behind inadequate cover. She moved like water, flowing between their attacks, using their aggression against them. When she struck, it was with precision rather than brutality, disabling rather than killing. 2 of the claim jumpers fled, helping their wounded companion to safety rather than continuing a fight they could no longer win. You held back, Alex observed as they collected their scattered equipment. They weren't trying to kill us, Solaria replied. Just scare us off. Seemed like overkill to end them for that. Alex smiled, not his usual sardonic expression, but something warmer and more genuine. Now you're starting to understand the difference between strength and violence. As the months passed, Salaria began to see the universe through different eyes. She learned to appreciate the complexity of moral choices, the way that context could transform heroes into villains, and vice versa. She saw Alex negotiate their way out of conflicts that could have turned bloody, watched him offer aid to strangers who had nothing to offer in return, witnessed his quiet acts of mercy toward opponents who'd tried to kill them moments before. Compassion isn't weakness, he told her, after she questioned his decision to share their medical supplies with wounded raiders. It's the ultimate expression of strength, the ability to help others even when they can't help you back. But it was the return to her homeworld that would truly test everything she'd learned. The message found them at a trading station in the neutral zone, carried by a courier who'd been paid well to track down Salaria, no matter where her exile had taken her. The sealed packet bore the mark of the Crimson Hunt, its contents brief and to the point. The clan was dying. In the months since Salaria's exile, corruption had spread through the leadership like a plague. The matron had begun executing hunters based on whispered accusations and personal grudges. Ancient alliances had been severed, traditional rivals had united against them, and the very foundations of their society were crumbling. "They need me," Salaria said, staring at the message with mixed emotions. "Do they?" Alex asked. "Or do they need someone to blame when everything falls apart?" It was a fair question, and one that Salaria couldn't answer with certainty. But as she read and reread the desperate words of hunters she'd grown up with, she felt the pull of obligation, not to the clan's leadership, but to the people who would suffer if the Crimson Hunt fell. "I have to go back." Alex nodded, unsurprised by her decision. "Then we go back." "We? You think I'm going to miss the chance to see how this story ends?" The journey home took 2 weeks, crossing space lanes that Salaria hadn't traveled since her youth. But when they finally descended through the atmosphere of her birth world, she barely recognized the landscape below. The great amphitheater that had housed her people for generations was scarred by plasma burns and collapsed sections. The training grounds where she'd learned her first killing forms were empty, their practice weapons scattered and broken. They landed at a small port several kilometers from the clan stronghold, Alex's contacts providing them with transportation and local intelligence. What they learned was worse than the message had suggested. The matron had declared herself supreme arbiter of the clan's destiny, purging anyone who questioned her increasingly erratic decisions. Traditional laws had been suspended, replaced by a reign of terror that had already claimed dozens of lives. Those hunters who hadn't fled into exile were trapped, too afraid to speak out, but equally afraid of what their silence was enabling. "Classic death spiral," Alex observed as they studied the intelligence reports. "Leadership loses legitimacy, doubles down on control instead of addressing the underlying problems, which erodes legitimacy further. Eventually, the whole system collapses. Can it be stopped? Depends. How much influence does tradition still have? Are there any respected elders who could challenge the matron's authority?" Salaria thought about the question, running through the clan hierarchy in her mind. There's the circle of mothers, the matriarchs of the major bloodlines. But they've always deferred to the matron in matters of law and custom. Then we need to give them a reason to stop deferring. They approached the clan's stronghold under cover of darkness, using skills Alex had taught Salaria about infiltration and stealth. The guards were fewer than they should have been, and those on duty seemed more focused on watching for enemies within than threats from without. The first sign of how far things had fallen came when they reached the outer chambers. The walls that had once displayed trophies from great hunts were now decorated with the heads of clan members who'd been executed for treason. Salaria recognized several faces, hunters she'd trained with, respected elders who'd questioned some minor policy decision, even young ones who'd committed no crime beyond being born to the wrong bloodline. "This is madness," Salaria whispered, her voice thick with horror. "This is fear," Alex corrected. "Fear of losing power, fear of being exposed as weak, fear of admitting mistakes. It makes people do things they'd never consider under normal circumstances." They made their way deeper into the stronghold, avoiding the main corridors where loyal guards still patrolled. Alex's training in infiltration served them well. His lessons about reading architectural spaces and predicting security patterns, allowing them to move like ghosts through a place that should have been impregnable. The sound of voices led them to one of the smaller ceremonial chambers, where they found a scene that made Solaria's blood run cold. Cathara knelt in the center of the room, her hands bound behind her back, while the matron stood over her with an executioner's blade. "You stand accused of sedition," the matron intoned, her voice echoing off the chamber walls, "of spreading lies and discord among the faithful, of questioning the righteous authority of your betters." Cathara's response was defiant despite her precarious position. "I questioned your sanity, you withered crone. There's a difference." The matron's face twisted with rage. "Your bloodline ends with you, traitor. Let your death serve as a lesson to any who would follow your example." Solaria started forward, but Alex's hand on her arm held her back. "Not yet," he whispered. "Wrong angle. Too many guards. No clear escape route. This isn't the moment. She'll be murdered. And if you charge in there now, you'll join her. Then what good will you be to anyone?" It was the hardest lesson Alex had ever taught her. The discipline to watch injustice unfold when immediate action would only make things worse. Solaria's every instinct screamed at her to intervene, to draw her blade and carve a path through the matron's guards. Instead, she forced herself to remain still, to think tactically instead of emotionally. The matron raised the executioner's blade, its edge gleaming in the torchlight. But before she could strike, another voice cut through the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. "I invoke the right of challenge." Solaria stepped into the chamber's center, her blade naked and ready. "He showed me fear. I'll show them. Choice." The assembled hunters fell silent, reading the choice in her eyes. She hadn't come home. She'd come to change everything. It was an ancient law, rarely invoked, that allowed an exiled hunter to return and face judgment through combat. The matron couldn't refuse without admitting that the old traditions no longer held sway, and that admission would undermine her authority more than any open rebellion. But instead of accepting the challenge herself, the matron turned to her champion, a massive hunter whose scars told the story of a dozen brutal campaigns. "Vorash will stand for me. Let the gods judge your worth through his blade." Vorash was everything Solaria had once aspired to be. Perfectly trained, absolutely disciplined, utterly committed to the clan's traditional ways. He moved into the chamber's center with mechanical precision, his weapon held in a grip that could have served as a textbook illustration. Solaria faced him across the sand-covered floor, her own blade steady in her hand. But as she settled into her stance, she realized something had changed. The rigid forms that had once defined her understanding of combat felt like prison walls, constraining rather than empowering. "Begin," the matron commanded. Vorash attacked immediately, his blade carving through the air in perfect textbook arcs. Solaria met his assault with techniques that would have been familiar to any member of the clan, until suddenly they weren't. She began to move like water, flowing around his attacks instead of meeting them head-on. When he struck high, she wasn't there. When he committed to a killing thrust, she turned it aside with minimal effort and counterattacked from an impossible angle. "What sorcery is this?" Vorash demanded, backing away with confusion written across his scarred features. "No sorcery," Solaria replied, her voice calm despite the deadly dance they were engaged in. "Just a different way of seeing." She began to demonstrate what Alex had taught her, using the environment as an extension of her capabilities. The chamber's torches created shifting patterns of light and shadow that she used to confuse her opponent's depth perception. The sand beneath their feet became a weapon in itself, kicked up to blind or shifted to unbalance. But more than technique, she used understanding. Vorash was a product of the same system that had created her, trained to perfection in forms that assumed opponents would fight according to the same rules. When faced with someone who fought according to different principles entirely, his perfect technique became a liability. The end came suddenly. Vorash overcommitted to what should have been a finishing stroke, his blade aimed at Solaria's heart with mechanical precision. But she wasn't where the form said she should be. Instead, she was beside him, her own weapon poised at his throat. For a heartbeat, the chamber was silent except for their labored breathing. Then Vorash spoke, his voice filled with wondering respect. "How do you hold your blade so lightly, yet strike with such precision?" Solaria looked down at her weapon, seeing it as if for the first time. Her grip was indeed different, flexible, adaptive, ready to change as circumstances demanded. "Because I no longer fear losing it," she said, the words coming from some deep well of understanding. Instead of delivering the killing stroke that tradition demanded, Solaria stepped back and lowered her weapon. I claim victory, but not your life. You fought with honor, Vorash. That's worth preserving. The gesture sent shock waves through the assembled hunters. To spare a defeated opponent was unprecedented, unthinkable, but it was also undeniably powerful. Solaria had proven her superiority through combat, then demonstrated her wisdom through mercy. The matron's face was purple with rage. Kill him! The law demands— The law is what we make it, Solaria interrupted, her voice carrying new authority. And I choose to make it something better than blind vengeance. She turned to address the assembled hunters, her words carrying to every corner of the chamber. Look around you. Look at what our traditions have become. We who once fought to protect now fight to destroy. We who once honored strength now worship fear. Blasphemy, the matron shrieked. Seize her! She corrupts our sacred ways. But none of the guards moved. Solaria's demonstration had done more than prove her combat skills. It had shown them a different way of being strong. I don't seek to destroy our traditions, Solaria continued. I seek to fulfill them. The first law of our people is that strength protects the weak. When did we forget that strength without wisdom is just brutality? The chamber erupted in arguing voices as hunters debated her words. Some called for her immediate execution, but others, more than Solaria had dared hope, began to nod in agreement. The corruption they'd witnessed over the past months had left many questioning what their clan had become. The matron, seeing her authority crumbling, made a desperate play for control. Guards, I command you to execute this traitor. But the guards, like everyone else in the chamber, were listening to Solaria's words with growing understanding. When they didn't move, the matron's face twisted with desperate fury. Then I'll do it myself. The ancient leader lunged forward, her own blade naked in her hand. But age and madness had made her clumsy, and Solaria sidestepped the attack with casual ease. The matron stumbled, off balance, and would have fallen if Solaria hadn't caught her arm. For a moment they stood frozen, the young exile supporting the ancient leader who'd cast her out. Then the matron's rage crumbled, replaced by something that might have been shame. I've failed, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I've destroyed everything I swore to protect. Not everything, Solaria said gently. Not yet. A voice from the chamber's entrance interrupted them. Alex, stepping out of the shadows with his hands raised to show he carried no weapons. Impressive speech, he said conversationally, but you might want to wrap this up. Your clan's got bigger problems heading this way. All eyes turned to him, confusion and suspicion warring in the hunter's expressions. Solaria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. What problems? Sensor sweeps picked up 3 battle cruisers dropping out of hyperspace about 20 minutes ago. Bone Reaper signatures heading this way fast. Alex's expression was grim. Looks like your enemies have decided that your civil war makes this the perfect time to settle old scores. The chamber erupted in shocked voices as the implications sank in. The Bone Reapers were the Crimson Hunt's oldest enemies, a rival clan whose thirst for conquest had made them the terror of a dozen systems. If they were coming here in force, it meant they intended to wipe out Solaria's people once and for all. How long do we have? Vorash asked, his earlier defeat forgotten in the face of this greater threat. 2 hours, maybe 3 if we're lucky, Alex replied. Depends on how much time they spend on orbital bombardment before they commit ground forces. The matron straightened, age and madness falling away as the magnitude of the crisis penetrated her fractured mind. Then we prepare for battle. Alert all hunters, activate the defense systems. With respect, Solaria interrupted, that's exactly the wrong approach. Every eye in the chamber turned to her, some angry, others desperate for any alternative to certain destruction. The Bone Reapers expect us to fight like warriors, Solaria explained, her mind racing through possibilities that Alex's training had opened up. They expect us to meet them head-on, to die gloriously in combat while they overwhelm us through superior numbers and firepower. What else can we do? Cathara asked, having been freed during the confusion. Solaria looked at Alex, seeing understanding pass between them. We fight like water. Over the next hour, Solaria found herself in the strange position of commanding the same hunters who'd witnessed her exile. But her demonstration of combat skill and her warning about the approaching threat had earned her a grudging respect, and even her former rivals were willing to listen to her desperate plan. Forget the traditional defensive positions, she told the assembled leaders. The Bone Reapers know where those are, know how to counter them. Instead, we evacuate the stronghold entirely and spread out through the canyon system. Abandon our home to cowards? One of the older hunters protested. Preserve our people so we can reclaim our home later, Solaria corrected. The canyons offer natural cover, multiple escape routes, and terrain that favors small unit tactics over mass assaults. Alex provided tactical expertise, his experience with asymmetric warfare proving invaluable as they planned their unconventional defense. Instead of meeting the enemy's strength with their own, they would flow around it, striking at weak points and withdrawing before the Bone Reapers could bring their superior firepower to bear. Hit and run, harassment, making them fight our kind of war instead of theirs, Alex explained to the gathered hunters. Make every meter cost them blood. Make them question whether this conquest is worth the price. The plan was heretical by traditional standards, abandoning every principle of honor and glory that the Crimson Hunt had cherished for generations. But as the hunters looked around the damaged stronghold, at the execution sites and the empty chambers, where their comrades had once trained, they began to understand that traditional approaches had already proven inadequate. The Bone Reaper assault came exactly as Alex had predicted. 3 massive ships settling into bombardment positions and raining plasma fire down on the stronghold's primary defensive positions. But those positions were empty, their abandonment timed to perfection. Solaria watched the destruction from a concealed position in the canyon walls, feeling each blast like a physical blow. The home she'd grown up in was being systematically destroyed, centuries of history reduced to slag and rubble. But the alternative, watching her people die in a hopeless last stand, would have been infinitely worse. First wave's landing, Alex reported, his borrowed sensor equipment tracking the enemy's movements. Looks like they're committing everything to a single push. Good for us. Means they're not expecting resistance. The Bone Reapers advanced into the stronghold with the confidence of conquerors, their heavy armor gleaming and weapons ready. They found empty chambers and abandoned positions, their victory apparently complete before the real fighting had even begun. That's when Solaria's people struck. The attacks came from everywhere and nowhere. Plasma bolts from hidden positions, improvised explosives triggered by remote detonation, hit-and-run assaults that left Bone Reaper squads confused and diminished. The invaders found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see against terrain they didn't understand. Solaria led one of the strike teams personally, using every technique Alex had taught her to maximum effect. They moved through the canyon system like ghosts, appearing long enough to inflict damage before vanishing into passages that only the Crimson Hunt knew existed. But the Bone Reapers were experienced warriors themselves, and they adapted quickly to the unconventional tactics. Their commander, a massive brute called Garnash, who'd earned his reputation through successful conquests across 3 systems, began to split his forces into smaller, more mobile units that could pursue the harassing attackers. They're learning, Alex observed as they watched enemy scouts probe deeper into the canyon system. We need to escalate before they figure out all our hiding spots. Solaria nodded, her mind already working through the final phase of their desperate plan. Signal all teams. Time for the convergence. What followed was the most complex military maneuver the Crimson Hunt had ever attempted. Instead of continuing their hit-and-run tactics, all the scattered strike teams began to converge on a single location, the Sacred Grove, where the clan's most important rituals had been conducted for generations. The Bone Reapers took the bait, their various units rushing to intercept what appeared to be a mass gathering of their enemies. But when they reached the grove, they found something unexpected. Not a desperate last stand, but a carefully prepared trap. The Sacred Grove was a natural amphitheater, its walls honeycombed with caves and passages that offered perfect positions for concealed marksmen. But more than that, it was a place of power for Solaria's people, a location that carried emotional and spiritual weight far beyond its tactical value. Garnash entered the grove at the head of his personal guard, his weapon raised and ready for the final slaughter. Instead, he found Solaria waiting for him in the grove's center, her blade naked in her hand. I claim the right of single combat, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the natural acoustics of the space. Let this be decided between champions as it was in the old days. The Bone Reaper commander laughed, a sound like grinding metal. You think I'm fool enough to honor ancient customs? My warriors will cut you down where you stand. Perhaps, Solaria agreed, but then your victory will always carry the stain of cowardice. Future generations will remember Garnash as the conqueror who was afraid to face a single exile in fair combat. The challenge hit home, as Solaria had known it would. Garnash had built his reputation on personal prowess as much as tactical genius, and the suggestion that he might be afraid of any opponent, especially a lone hunter from a conquered clan, was intolerable. "Very well," he snarled, waving his warriors back. "I'll kill you myself, then finish your people at my leisure." The duel was brutal. Garnash was stronger, faster, more experienced, his blade work magnificent in its violence. But Solaria fought like water, flowing around his attacks, using his aggression against him, turning the grove's uneven terrain to her advantage. "Stand still and fight," Garnash roared as his perfect technique failed to find his target. "I am fighting," Solaria replied calmly, "just not the way you expect." The end came when Garnash overcommitted to a killing stroke. Solaria wasn't where he expected. She was inside his guard, her blade finding the gap in his armor. The commander fell, his weapon tumbling away. Instead of delivering the traditional death blow, Solaria stepped back. "Your champion is defeated," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the grove. "Honor is satisfied. Take your ships and leave our space. Don't return." For a moment, the silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Garnash spoke, his voice thick with pain, but surprisingly clear. "You fight like no warrior I've ever faced. How do you move with such certainty while holding your blade so lightly?" Solaria looked down at her weapon, seeing her own reflection in its polished surface. "Because I've learned the difference between holding on and holding tight, between strength and rigidity, between victory and vengeance." She extended her hand to the fallen commander, helping him to his feet despite the shocked protests of both armies. "Today we were enemies. Tomorrow perhaps we can be something else." Garnash stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but not today." He turned to his warriors, his voice carrying clear command despite his wounds. "We leave. The conquest is abandoned." As the Bone Reaper forces withdrew, Solaria found herself surrounded by her own people. Hunters who'd thought themselves doomed, elders who'd watched their world crumble, young ones who'd never known anything but fear and uncertainty. "What happens now?" Vorash asked, speaking for all of them. Solaria looked around the sacred grove, seeing it with new eyes. The place of ancient power had become something different, not just a site of ritual observance, but a symbol of transformation. "Now we rebuild," she said simply, "but we rebuild it better." The weeks that followed were perhaps the most challenging of Solaria's life. Reconstruction was more than a matter of clearing rubble and repairing damaged structures. It required rebuilding the very foundations of their society. The matron had stepped down, her brief descent into madness serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power. In her place, the Circle of Mothers had established a new form of governance, one that balanced traditional authority with mechanisms for accountability and change. "I'm honored by your trust," she told the assembled clan, "but what we need isn't a single strong leader. It's a community that understands true strength comes from wisdom, not force. People who know when to fight and when to show mercy." She gestured to the hunters around her. "I propose we lead together, not as ruler and subjects, but as partners working toward common goals." The idea was radical, challenging assumptions that had governed their society for generations. But the near destruction they'd all witnessed had created an appetite for change, and Solaria's demonstration of unconventional wisdom had earned her the credibility to propose it. Over the following months, the new system took shape. Decisions were made collectively, with input from multiple perspectives and careful consideration of long-term consequences. Traditional combat training continued, but it was supplemented with education in diplomacy, philosophy, and the kind of tactical thinking that Alex had introduced. Speaking of Alex, Solaria found him preparing to leave on a transport bound for the Outer Rim, his few possessions packed in the same battered duffel bag he'd carried throughout their journey together. "You're really going?" she asked, though she'd known this moment would come. "My work here's done," Alex replied, but his expression was softer than his words suggested. "You don't need a teacher anymore. Haven't for weeks, actually." "How can you be sure?" Alex smiled, the genuine expression she'd learned to value above all his others. "Because you've stopped asking what you should do and started asking what you want to do. That's the difference between following someone else's path and walking your own." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the transport's crew prepare for departure. Finally, Solaria spoke. What you taught me, it wasn't just about fighting, was it? What do you think? Solaria considered the question, thinking back over everything that had happened since that first encounter in the desert canyon. You taught me that strength isn't about never being defeated. It's about learning from defeat and becoming something better. Close. What else? That the way you hold a weapon, or anything else, says everything about your relationship with it. Grip too tightly and you become rigid, unable to adapt. Hold too loosely and you lose control entirely. Alex nodded approvingly. And that the most important battles aren't won with blades at all. They're won by changing hearts and minds, by showing people a better way of being strong. Now you're getting it. Alex shouldered his pack, preparing to board the transport. One last lesson before I go? Always. The blade you carry, it's not your sister's anymore. It's not your ancestors either. It's yours, shaped by your choices and defined by how you choose to use it. Don't dishonor it by trying to make it something it's not. Solaria drew her weapon one final time, feeling its weight in her hand. The meteoric iron gleamed in the afternoon sun, its edge still keen despite everything it had endured. But more than that, it felt right, perfectly balanced, an extension of her own will rather than a burden inherited from the past. Thank you, she said. But when she looked up, Alex was already walking toward the transport. He paused at the ramp, turning back with that familiar sardonic smile. You'll be fine. Without you? Because of you? He disappeared into the transport, but his voice carried back one final time. Hey, kid, now you're holding it right. Years later, they would tell stories of Solaria the Wise, the warrior who learned to fight without fighting, who conquered through understanding rather than force. But Solaria preferred the story of a human mercenary who taught an alien warrior that true strength wasn't about how tightly you held your weapon, but about knowing when to hold it at all. She never saw Alex again, though rumors reached her of his work as a peacekeeper, helping settle conflicts through wisdom rather than force. And sometimes late at night, she would draw her blade and practice the flowing forms he'd taught her, movements that turned combat into art, her grip perfect now, firm enough to control, flexible enough to adapt, confident enough to show mercy.